guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video. I post these every single Wednesday, so if you want to watch them, make sure you click that subscribe button somewhere down there. And also I post beauty, lifestyle, fashion-y, whatever I'm kind of feeling videos on Fridays, sometimes Mondays. I switch up, you know. But this is going to be a video about Madeleine Mccann. This is probably my most requested video ever. I wasn't intending to film this. I thought it was something that everyone just knows. But apparently the story wasn't as big worldwide as it was in the UK. I'll get to the actual story in a bit, but I want to give you a bit of backstory first as to why I feel so personally close to this case. But I think a lot of people who live or lived in the UK at the time that Madeleine Mccann went missing can really relate to this. I saw this on the news every single day for about 6 months, probably even a year. This was the biggest missing persons case in UK history. I have never seen a case blow up as much as this one did, and I felt so connected. Every time you turn on the TV there was a video of Maddie, there was a video I think of her opening her Christmas presents the Christmas before she went missing, and I just saw that video so many times. I saw her face everywhere. It was something I was so connected to. I was 12, nearly 13 at the time. I remember where I was when I first heard the story about Maddie going missing. I was camping with my family and some friends down in Lulworth Cove on the coast, and I remember walking past a pub and seeing a news bulletin flash up on their TV. I remember that. And my little sister was quite close to Maddie's age. My little sister at the time was 6 and Maddie was 3, nearly 4 when she went missing, and it really affected my little sister. My little sister didn't sleep for a year. She was so scared of being taken, and you know it's a massive story when a 6-year-old can like understand what's going on. And now let's move on to the actual story. Let me tell you the story of Madeleine Mccann. So Madeleine Mccann was 3 years old when she went missing on the 3rd of May 2007. It was actually only 9 days before her 4th birthday. She was holidaying with her family in Praia de Luz in Portugal, which is an area that's very well known to British tourists. The area is like pretty much all British tourists. So she was on holiday in Praia de Luz with her family, her mum Kate Mccann, her dad Jerry Mccann, and her 2 younger twin siblings who were 2 years old, Sean and Amelie. Now to this day, Kate and Jerry Mccann are still in the newspapers constantly. They are still very much in the limelight for reasons that we'll get to later. So Maddie had blonde hair. She was obviously toddler sized. She was 3 years old. She had very interesting eyes. Her eyes were sort of blue and green, and she had a strip in her right iris, like just a strip of dark brown, maybe black. I'll post a photo of it now so you can see. So she's got very distinctive eyes. Something else to note as well were Kate and Jerry Mccann were also both practicing doctors. They were Roman Catholics. They were very like good people, like they were held high in society. So the McCanns weren't on holiday, just the 5 of them. They were on holiday with 5 other friends and 5 other children. So in total there were 7 adults and 8 children. And they didn't stay in a hotel, they stayed in a holiday apartment let sort of thing. It was in a sort of oceanside resort, but it wasn't a hotel per se. The McCanns were staying in apartment 5A and the other families were sort of in other apartments. I think one was above them, one was next door to them. So they were all very close together. And this wasn't a gated complex they were staying in. And 5A was actually accessible via the street. There was a gate that led to some steps, and there was a child safety gate at the top of the steps, and then after that you could pretty much just go straight up to the patio doors. So there were sliding glass patio doors that led into a living room, and then by the front door, which was like the other end of the apartment, there was the children's bedroom one side. Through the sliding patio doors you looked over onto like a holiday complex sort of thing. There was a pool, tennis courts, tapas restaurant and a bar. Hopefully that gives you sort of an overall view of the complex they were staying in and what the situation was. Now let's talk you through what happened on the day that Madeleine went missing. So like I said, it was the 3rd of May, is the penultimate day of their holiday, and the kids actually spent most of their day in a holiday club. So they went for breakfast in the morning. Something of note here is Maddie was heard asking her parents, "Why didn't you come when me and Sean were crying last night?" That's not really too relevant, but that was definitely something that was very widely reported. Maddie asked her parents that in the morning. So they had their breakfast, not much was thought of it, and then the kids went off to their kids club. They went to their kids club for the morning, then their parents grabbed them and they had lunch together, and then they headed back to the pool. And actually at 2:29 p.m. on that day, the last ever photo, or what was thought to be the last ever photo of Madeleine, was taken. Insert here. So the McCanns put their children to bed about 7 o'clock that night, business as usual. Maddie was wearing pink and white eel pyjamas, and she went to bed with her comfort blanket and a little toy cat she had that she called Cuddle Cat. And this is where things go downhill, I think. So every night the parents would put their children to bed, and around 8:30 they would go to the tapas restaurant. Now I said earlier that the apartment overlooked the tapas restaurant, so from the apartment you could see the tapas restaurant. However, from the restaurant itself you couldn't see the apartment properly. You could only see sort of the top of the apartment. You couldn't quite see the sliding doors. So every night the parents, all the parents and not just the McCanns, like the other parents they went with as well, booked themselves a table outside so they could sort of see the apartments where they were sat, and they'd go for dinner. Now there is a lot of criticism for Kate and Jerry McCann for doing this. So from the apartment to the restaurant, as the crow flies, it was a 55-metre walk. Very, very quick and easy walk. However, there is a pool in the way, so to actually get to the restaurant the parents had to go down the steps I mentioned earlier, go out onto the street and round, and then to the restaurant that way. So they did this every night. The restaurant always booked them the same table. There was actually always a note on the restaurant reservation saying that the children were alone in the apartment, so they wanted this table so they could keep an eye on the apartments. And Kate McCann always has said that she thinks somebody saw that note on the reservation, and that's how they knew the children were alone. Now, so every night all the parents would leave their children asleep in the apartments. Now this is where things are a bit dodgy. The McCanns never actually locked their children inside the apartment. So it was the patio doors that are visible, not the front doors. They'd always leave via the patio doors, but you can't lock them from the outside, only from the inside. So the patio doors were just open. They'd always close them, but they were unlocked, so they could be opened and closed easily if somebody wanted to get into the apartment, which is where I think the big problem lies, to be honest, because you don't leave your sleeping children in an apartment that they don't know in a random place with unlocked doors. I think it would be a totally different story if the McCanns were able to lock the patio doors from the outside so the children were safe inside, but they couldn't. The patio doors were unlocked. They did close the curtains inside though so people couldn't see in. Every night whilst they were at the tapas restaurant, the parents would go back every half an hour to check on the children. Jerry actually made the first check at 9:05 p.m. that night, so just half an hour after they'd arrived at the tapas restaurant. So went in and checked on them. All 3 children were asleep. He does remember though that when they left the door ajar, and when he got there the door was wide open. At 9:15 p.m, another one from the Tapas 7, which is what the parents at the tapas restaurant became known as, Jane Tanner went to check on her own children. So it was at 9:15 p.m. she's walking back. Now this is where she sees a sighting that's pretty much derailed the entire investigation. She stated that she saw a man in a dark brown jacket and beige trousers carrying a child of Maddie's description across the road. Now, this for a long time was a big part of the investigation. They wanted to find this man. The child was wearing pink and white pyjamas as Maddie was. She was blonde. It would have been quite easy to think at the time that it was Maddie. Now when she first saw the man, she didn't think, oh, that man's got Maddie, because they didn't know that Maddie was missing at this point. She just assumed it was a guy carrying his child. And actually that is what it turned out to be. Now this was such a huge part of the investigation. Everyone was hunting for this man who was carrying a child across the road. The child was asleep in his arms. They assumed that this was the guy who stole Maddie. Turns out that it was just a guy who picked up his child, another British tourist, from the creche at the complex, and she was asleep. He was carrying her home. So the police took so much time trying to find this guy, and it didn't turn out to be anything. Another strange thing here is she actually says she passed Jerry McCann on her way to check on her children. She says Jerry was talking to another British tourist, which he confirms, yes, he was talking to somebody else on the street. However, neither of them recall seeing Jane walk past. And from what I can see, the streets were pretty narrow, so it would have been pretty strange for them not to see her walk past, but then again, she has no reason to lie about seeing Jerry speaking to this other guy. Kate was intending to go check on her children again about 9:30, every half an hour, like I said. However, Matthew Oldfield actually offered to go check on Kate's children because he was going back to check on his own. So he goes to Kate's apartment to check, so he just opens the sliding doors, walks in. He says again that the door was open rather than ajar. He says he saw the doors open, saw Sean and Amelie asleep in their beds, because from where you stand in the doorway you can straight away see where the twins were asleep. However, to see Maddie you have to actually go in and look around, but when he saw Sean and Amelie were there, he was like, oh, the kids are fine. Didn't actually go in far enough to check that Maddie was there. And here's where it all goes wrong for the McCanns. Kate goes to check on her children again at 10 p.m. And she walks in there and sees that Maddie has gone. So she walks in through the patio doors and again noticed that the door's open. Then she walks into the bedroom and sees that the window's open. Now, they haven't left the window open when they'd left. Matthew Oldfield actually said that he couldn't remember if the window was open or not. He didn't pay any attention to it. But Kate said that's the first thing she noticed, and that's when she started to panic, looked around, saw Sean and Emily were asleep. Maddie was gone. So Maddie's comfort blanket and her cuddle cat was still there. She briefly searched the apartment looking for Maddie. She was gone. So she runs back to the tapas restaurant screaming, saying, "Maddie's gone, someone's taken her." Now, in the media in the UK, this was a massive thing. The media were like, why the hell would Kate assume straight away that somebody's taken her daughter? For me personally, as someone who has like catastrophic thinking, for me every scenario is always the worst scenario. That's probably what I would jump to as well. I don't think that was such a massive thing as the media made it out to be. However, at this point, after she's running back screaming, saying, "Maddie's gone, someone's taken her," she's left the twins alone in the apartment, which is just bad parenting. By 10:10, Jerry McCann sent Matthew to alert the reception for the apartment complex, and at 10:30 the resort has activated its missing child procedure. So 60 staff and guests searched for Maddie until 4:30 in the morning. Everyone was a part of this. At 11:10, 2 police officers arrived. I think that's kind of disgusting if you're asking me. Reception have called the police at 10:10. And they haven't arrived to a missing child's case until an hour later at 11:10. So they arrived, 2 officers briefly searched for Maddie themselves, obviously still haven't found her. And at midnight they called the criminal police. I'm not entirely sure how the whole Portuguese police thing goes. I'm not sure why it was like 2 officers then had to call the criminal police. I don't really get it, but anyway, at midnight the criminal police arrive. 2 patrol dogs were brought out to help the search at 2 AM, and then by 8 AM they were bringing out search and rescue dogs. The police made a lot of mistakes during this time, during the initial search for Maddie, and I'm going to read you them. So the hour or the few hours after a child goes missing is called the golden hour. You've got to find the child within these times, otherwise it's unlikely they're ever going to be found again. That is the sort of general consensus on missing child's cases. The police made so many mistakes here, and I'm literally going to read them from here because otherwise I'm not going to be able to memorise all this. So the police weren't actually given a description of Maddie for hours. So they were looking for a missing child and had no idea what this missing child looked like. There were no house-to-house searches, and there were no roadblocks until 10 AM the next morning. That's 12 hours after it's thought that she was taken or disappeared. If she was put in a car and taken, she would be been long gone by 12 hours later. The police didn't request motorway surveillance photos of vehicles leaving Praia de Lis that night. So, you know, on motorways obviously there's a lot of cameras. They have never ever requested, to anyone's knowledge, any photos of cars that were on the motorway. It took Interpol 5 days to issue a global missing persons alert. Not everyone at the resort at that time was interviewed. There are multiple people who were staying at the resort at that time, and they have said to the media, the police never spoke to us. The crime scene was not secured at all. And the crime scene, obviously in this case being 5A, the apartment the McCanns were staying in. Forensic samples were sent to 3 labs in Portugal from the initial search of the crime scene. It was reported on June the 1st that the DNA from one stranger was found. I say stranger because in this time around 20 people had entered the apartment before it was closed off. The police were just letting people walk in and out. So the stranger could have been the kidnapper if Maddie was kidnapped, or it could have literally been any of these 20 people that were allowed to walk into the apartment. So tape was placed across the doorway of the children's bedrooms, but the police officers guarding it left at 3 AM and didn't secure it. So 5A was left empty for a month. So it was a holiday let, so somebody sort of rented it and let it out to holiday tourists. So it was left empty for a month, whilst initial investigations happened. Then it was let out again for another month, and then in August 2007 it was secured again for more forensic DNA analysis, whatever. But there would also be the DNA from all the people who had stayed in it in that month that was being let out. It was just disgusting. So of course it was a massive story. Crowds gathered immediately around the apartment. They were stood underneath the windowsill, they were stood around the front door. Any evidence that was there could have been trampled on, and they would have left fingerprints places. And officers were actually seen dusting for fingerprints and DNA without wearing any protective clothing or gloves. So basically the police did not do what they should have done at this time. Like I said, I don't know the Portuguese policing protocols, I don't know any of that, but I think it's just pretty like general knowledge that if you're dusting fingerprints, wear protective clothing yourself. Maybe don't let people in on the crime scene. Something to note was there was massive tension between the British and Portuguese police. The British police immediately got involved. Of course, it was a British child that gone missing. So the Portuguese police obviously did their best, but I don't know if anybody's ever seen a missing persons case on this scale before. So the Portuguese police did actually let the British police have a room within their police station where the British police could come and like do their own investigations, but there was a lot of tension between them. So in Portugal, from what I can figure out, is police have to wait for magistrates to sign off on decisions before they can go in and do things, whereas over here pretty much it's just all within the police, so they can do whatever they want. So things took a lot longer than they would have done over here, and the Portuguese police just didn't like the British being over there, to be honest. They felt, and this is the direct quote from somebody who I think was working within the police department at this time, the Portuguese felt condescended and British were being a colonial power. And to be honest, the whole tension between the two sets of police when they should have been working together probably hindered the investigation a hell of a lot. It became a massive media circus as well. Like I've said lots of times, it was all over the news for so long, which definitely hindered the investigation as well, because when there's journalists everywhere, news reporters, people trying to figure out themselves what happened, it's gonna hinder the police. I think all over the resort were now journalists, people leaving footprints, fingerprints, all this stuff. And I think quickly after Madeleine's disappearance, the McCanns decided to market Maddie. Now this sounds bad, it sounds like they just wanted to get famous off it. That isn't what it was, I don't think. The McCanns wanted to keep Maddie in the public eye. They did interviews, they did everything that they could to keep Maddie's face on the front page of newspapers, the first like news report that was on in the evening. They wanted everyone to know her face, and so they marketed her and they made her into like a business plan. They made sure she was everywhere all the time. Let's talk about some suspects. Maddie's been missing now for 10 years. It's now 2017 and nobody has ever seen Maddie since that day. Now we're going to talk about some suspects and then some other theories that could have happened to her. Now the first suspect that the police really latched onto was somebody called Robert Murat. Robert Murat was 34 years old, he was British Portuguese, he was a property consultant, and he lived very near Pradela's, very near apartment 5A with his mother. He actually lived 137 metres away to be exact, and he lived in the direction of which Tana saw the man that she thought had Madeleine walking. So 3 members of the Tapas 7 say they actually saw Robert Murat stood outside the apartment 5A shortly after Madeleine went missing. However, him and his mother both say they were at home at the time Madeleine disappeared. He was searched, his pool was drained, his cars, computers, phones were all examined. Sniffer dogs didn't find anything. Like literally, the police had not really any reason at all to think it was this guy, apart from he was the guy that they latched onto. I remember hearing his name a lot around the time of the initial investigation. The police were convinced it was him. Everyone was convinced it was him, and they never found anything. Maybe it was him, but they had zero evidence to suggest that it was. He actually sued the police and the media, I think, for libel, and I think he got a lot of money from it. So another suspect was somebody who is just known as Ugly. So an ugly blonde-haired man was seen around the apartment on 29th of April. He was seen again on May 2nd across the road from 5A, apparently just watching the apartment. On the 30th of April, the daughter of the owners of the apartment saw a blonde-haired man leaning against the wall behind the apartment. So this man is being seen dotted all over, but always staring at apartment 5A, and always during the time that the McCanns were staying there. And he was seen again on the 2nd of May, so the day before Madeleine went missing, standing by the tapas restaurant, you guessed it, staring at apartment 5A. He was Caucasian, in his mid-30s, cropped short hair, ugly with spots, and multiple people have given the police descriptions of this guy. He was a very distinctive person apparently, and a lot of people saw him, and he's never really been seen ever since Madeleine went missing. They have no idea who this guy was. So he is obviously a big suspect. I personally think he is incredibly suspicious. I think if there's anybody who might have taken Madeleine, I think it was probably this guy. And next I'm going to talk about the suspects, which I'm sure you've been waiting for me to mention. Kate and Gerry McCann. Kate and Gerry McCann have been widely thought of as being the reason behind their daughter's death, or her disappearance. A lot of people think that they killed her. Personally, I don't. Maybe I just like to see the best in people. Maybe I don't want to believe that parents could harm their child in any way. But I think that it was just a witch hunt, and a lot of people jumped onto the fact that it was Kate and Gerry that killed her. Regardless of the fact if they did it or not, I don't know. They were irresponsible parents. They left their 3-year-old daughter and 2-year-old twins in an apartment with an unlocked door alone every night whilst they're on holiday. Even if the children woke up and wondered, they'd have no idea where they were. I think it was just so crazy irresponsible, but I do not think that means they're responsible for her disappearance. Like, they were, like, indirectly, but I don't think they harmed her themselves. So the most well thought theory as to what happened to Madeleine at the hands of her parents is that they were doctors. Madeleine was a hyperactive child. She was a lot of hard work. She was a toddler. She was 3 years old. They usually are hard work. I work with children, I know. They say the McCanns were doctors and they slipped their children sleeping pills often to get them to sleep. There's no actual evidence behind this apart from speculation, but people think that they frequently gave their children sleeping pills to make them go to sleep and to ensure that they stayed asleep whilst the parents were at the restaurant. And generally what a lot of people think happened is that Maddie had an adverse reaction to the pills one night and she died. Maybe they overdosed her. The McCanns didn't know what to do, hid her body and pretended she went missing. And there are lots of reasons why people think the McCanns are guilty. It hasn't come out of nowhere. I'm going to read you a list now of reasons why they could be guilty. Now the police brought in trained cadaver dogs. Cadaver dogs are basically trained to smell death. And they brought cadaver dogs in. It was the British police that brought them, not the Portuguese police. They reacted positive to traces of death, the scent of death, in the boot of the McCanns' rental car. Now this was a car that the McCanns actually rented 3 weeks after Maddie's disappearance. So to me that makes zero sense, because if Maddie had died at their hands, why would they have Maddie in the boot of the car that they rented 3 weeks after? I think that is the main thing that leads people to believe that it was the McCanns. The dogs also found traces of death behind the sofa in the living room of the apartment and on and under the parents' veranda. So the McCanns acted very strange in interviews after Maddie went missing. They sort of looked at each other before answering. They were very stilted. They sort of came across as quite emotionless, I think, to a lot of people in interviews. The next one is a big one that gets me. After Maddie's disappearance, Kate was interviewed by the police. She refused to answer 48 questions that the police asked her. She was legally represented, so she did have a lawyer there in case she said anything wrong. But she said no comment to 48 questions, and the police only asked her 49. I'll link a Guardian article down below, or Independent, I can't remember if it's Guardian or Independent, that says all 48 questions she refused to answer. It's just like questions that you would ask if a child's gone missing. You ask the parents these questions, and she refused to answer all of them. There were a lot of inconsistencies between the statements given by the Tapas 7 and the McCanns. However, this could easily be explained. So when the police were interviewing the McCanns and the Tapas 7, they were obviously asking the questions in Portuguese, and then they were translated to English. The people were answering in English, then it was translated back to Portuguese, and then back to English again so the people could sign off on their statements. I mentioned Maddie's toy earlier, Cuddle Cat, and something that a lot of people jumped onto very quickly is Kate McCann actually washed Cuddle Cat. If your child dies, you want to keep their scent with you, don't you? You don't wash their favourite cuddly toy. It was the Portuguese press which I think first jumped onto the McCanns killed their daughter bandwagon. They started running stories about how Maddie died in the apartment, and that obviously transformed into the McCanns killed their child. I think a lot of the McCann stuff, they were actually like officially declared as suspects, so this wasn't just a like media thing. The police genuinely thought it was them too. However, they had no evidence apart from circumstantial stuff. I find it very hard to believe they did it. I don't know if I just am too much of a nice person and I don't want to believe it. I just don't think they did. How would you act if your child disappeared and you were thrown into public eye, interviews every day, like you were a suspect? How would you act? Like, if everyone thinks you killed your child and you didn't, how would you act about that? You would act suspicious. You wouldn't want to say anything wrong. You would look at your partner before you answered things. Also, if your daughter's died in a foreign country, you don't know the area, how do you know where to bury her? I find it very hard to believe these people who don't know Pradelas at all have been able to find a spot around there to dispose of their child, and it's never been found. I think time will tell with the McCanns, to be honest. Sean and Emily are now 12 years old, so if they are neglectful parents, if they did kill their child Madeleine, then like, they're probably not going to be treating Sean and Emily the best as well. So maybe Sean and Emily will come out in 10 years time and say, yes, we believe our parents did it. The inquiry was actually closed on the 21st July 2008. There was no evidence to link it to Murat. There's no evidence to link it to the McCanns. The police officially said, we have no suspects. The McCanns did actually hire their own private investigator after the inquiry was closed, and the private investigators never found anything of note either. Let's talk about some things that could have happened if it wasn't any of these people that killed Maddie or took Maddie. Maddie could have wandered off. Her parents did leave the apartment unlocked at the end of the day. Maddie was 3 years old. She was inquisitive. Maybe she got up and walked out of the apartment, walked out onto the street. Maybe she was hit by a car and somebody panicked and bundled her into a car. Maybe she ran into the wrong person on the street. This was a beachside resort. Maybe Maddie wandered all the way down to the beach and got in the ocean and drowned. Maybe. For me, I think the most plausible explanation was that she was taken. I do think this ugly blonde man is definitely someone of note. I think he probably definitely could have had something to do with it. Maddie easily could have just been taken. A lot of people say, why weren't the younger children taken? For human trafficking purposes, it's horrible to think about, but a 3-year-old is going to be more profitable than babies, which is what Sean and Emily basically were. I do think somebody was watching. I think they saw the McCanns' routine, knew that every night Maddie would be alone at 8:30, and they went in and took her. They took an opportunity and it worked out for them, I suppose. I like to think that Maddie was maybe human trafficked, not for any paedophilia, anything like that. Maybe for adoption. Maybe she was taken and sold to a family and she's been raised and she's been loved, and maybe that's what happened. Like, you never know these things. I like to think that's what happened. Probably isn't what happened. I think she was taken and probably killed very shortly after, which is horrible to think about. 10 years later and we still don't know what happened to Madeleine McCann. I used to wake up every morning and check the news hoping to see that she'd been found, and 10 years later she hasn't. It's sad. Really sad. I don't know, thinking about it really. But I do hope you enjoyed this. Again, I'll put a poll up in the corner so you can vote on who you want me to talk about next week. And let me know down below if you enjoyed it. Anybody, any recommendations, please let me know. And make sure you're subscribed. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.